recording. Okay, welcome, SLP212. So this week we're doing module 13, which I don't know, I'm so off. I feel way off with things. Normally, like, we'll be almost ready for what's it called, for finals. But anyway, okay, module 13. Two things I want to say about this part. So vocabulary, narrative language categories, we work on those skills with all ages. So regardless of the age, we're usually working on one component of that if we're doing language. So with our young population, we're trying to build words. We're trying to get them to understand that words, a certain word represents something. Narrative language is that expressive piece where they can relate information, tell, narrative being storytelling, but really that's important for retelling all kinds of information. Categories is definitely part of language organization. So a lot of times when we're looking expressively, they might struggle with composing sentences, formulating questions, or accessing information. So definitely some things with categories. And then in our adult rehab, we're trying to work on that word finding, that some of those pieces definitely come into play. So it's just at maybe different levels versus our young population versus our adult population. But I just want to say that oftentimes we're working on one of these three components in some way. So I do. Apologize. One second. There we go. So stories and narratives. So when I say narrative language, I'm kind of using more of that broader term. It's not just stories of when we think of literacy, but what I'm looking at is the narrative. What did you do in your day to day? What happened when you went to your friend's house? What happened when you went to the doctor? So these are things that we ask, or relating information between people are super important because it's narrative. It's usually narrative. We want to know the sequence, the order. What did they say? What did you say? What happened? So obviously we develop those skills through shared book reading. So number one way to help narrative language is to read stories, storytelling, performing arts, fine arts, as well as children's creation of oral, visual, written, and multimedia stories. So really looking on those parts of the story. So really developing setting, characters, plots, and themes. And why is it important? So really we look at a child's ability to understand and tell stories, also strong links to their later language and literacy success. So definitely it's tied to their literacy as well as their language skills. And definitely we know looking at succinct information. So I don't know if you've ever listened to somebody who can't quite follow the story. You're not sure what happened when or who's at play. Definitely some of those things can definitely be a challenge for our more language delayed or someone who's now doing cognitive rehab. We definitely want to make sure they understand kind of that beginning, middle, ending part. And sorry, I have something in my eye. My twins were throwing stuff. Oh my goodness. So early communicators. So some of those developmental milestones that are important: enjoying and listening to simple stories. Definitely when we talk about attention, auditory attention, we really, as a society, I think our attention as a whole is maybe not where it used to be. I don't want to say poor, that's not really the right word, but I think they've declined a bit. So really listening. So developing those listening skills at a young age is critical for their success in many ways. And oftentimes too, what I like about books when we're working with our young population is that's how we can interact more with language. we have pictures, we have visuals, we have something tangible to hold. So somebody was asking me, I'm not saying never. I think if we're using electronic reading type iPads and stuff like that, or watching a book being read on YouTube, not always a fan of that either, but I think that is kind of that multimedia. They need to not just watch it, but they need to be able to do it and hold something tangible in their hands. So definitely some things with just the actual book and understanding the concept of a book and stories is important. So at 2 to 3 years, children will start to tell stories. So they might tell you about something, or tell you about their show that they like to watch, that kind of thing. Language and emergent literacy learners, so 30 to 60 months. So we're looking at that 3 to 5 age. We want to see, most 4-year-olds should be able to tell a story in the right order. And definitely looking at that retell in a right order also develops those kind of parts of syntax. So we're talking about past, present, future, those verb forms, past tense, future, definitely that progressive, that present progressive, the ing, running, walking, singing, that kind of thing. That narrative piece helps develop those, what I would say, higher level syntax skills. So types of stories, and obviously I think you guys are all familiar in what I work with this teacher who likes to say genre. If she says genre one more time, I'm gonna lose my mind, but hang on, let me let people in the room. It's like it won't register. Sorry about that. So looking at the different types of stories or genres: fictional, biographies, myths, legends, fairy tales, fables, oh Lord, and then cultural and traditional stories. So definitely looking at kind of those different cultural forms of stories or beliefs. Different cultures have different beliefs that kind of are passed down, or myths or legends. So definitely there's a lot of cultural components to narrative language, which I also really like. And those are important. I remember I have a kid and he was talking about Sinterklaas. His mom's from Europe. And I remember he was trying to retell the story and some of the beliefs, or all of the story. Really, I had that mom explain it to me. Because he wasn't, obviously he's in therapy, we're working on it. But I wasn't sure if he got it right or not. So it's hard for me to give him feedback because I didn't know the story either. So just learning some things, I think that's fun. It's good for kids to know that, especially things related to their culture or heritage is super important for them to understand that too. So, and kind of those pieces are important. Themes. So a lot of times too, we learn other skills through stories. So like thoughts, emotions, feelings, problem solving, so a lot of emotion words definitely are helpful. And thematic units, when we're looking at that, what I like about literacy books, narrative piece, can kind of bring in those thematic units. So all of those are cohesive. So when you're learning about something, you're learning vocab, you're learning, lately I feel like it's been a lot of like spring stuff. You'll see it's April, we're talking about spring. It's easy to tie in other pieces of information, lots of vocabulary, a lot of those language building components. And narrative language is very evidence-based. We do know the better someone's able to retell a story, usually their language and literacy skills are higher. So kind of looking through this, there's a lot more. There's some other kind of other references in this, but that's really talking about narrative, those narrative components. So I really like this. This is really talking about the research of it. And One second, it's not moving. Okay. So the oral to literate language continuum. So I really like this because this is kind of the best, what I would call summary in a, it's got a lot of pop for a little bit. But really, oral language is the least formal style of language. And obviously, and when we say highly contextualized, so that's obviously what I would say language in real time is kind of how I describe it. We've got facial expressions, gestures, cues, tone of voice, context in which the language is taking place. Narrative discourse rely on familiar structure. So usually when we're retelling a story, we kind of give the players the problem, or the event and the outcome. We kind of usually have kind of that beginning, middle, and end. We kind of develop some people in a story, and they're somewhere in the middle. So they're between literate language and oral language. So we have a kind of that basic oral language, narrative discourse, and then literate language. And this is what we see in formal formal context, i.e. in an educational or learning environment typically. So definitely that's kind of some of those different language components within that narrative language piece. So I do like how that kind of breaks it down and why each piece is important. So that's the other part too. I don't ever want to prioritize language or components of language. What we see is each part has its purpose. And sometimes in a functional manner, something's going to be more important to a person versus others as far as functionally their language skills go. So when your supervisor is talking to you about the functionality of it. So let's say we have a client, I know in adult rehab, we had this discussion a lot. Obviously a family member or the person themselves want to get back to where they were. But sometimes our language is impaired long-term and we've got to get somewhere close to it. So that's kind of looking at where they might have more difficulty with literate language versus narrative discourse or oral language. Or really, we just want oral language to be functional. We are not really worried about narrative or literate language. Somebody wants to return to work and they need literate language to do their job. That's totally different than somebody who doesn't need that and wants to return to their job. So definitely I kind of look at that continuum more in our adult population, especially working with them, trying to regain skills, like what continuum is important for them. Because not everyone needs to have literate language or write literate language to do their job. They might need narrative, hey, we did this, this, and this. Even looking from an SLP perspective. If I had a stroke and my language is impaired, could I even return to work? I don't know. That's, hopefully I've got some good SLPs working with me to help determine that. But so those are just some things too. There's some sequence word cards and it's just first, next, last, and hopefully, oh, sorry, those of you who see, I was working on my social stories earlier. Oh, touching yourself, playing with myself. So sorry, that was lovely. It's a nice little bonus today. Why is that not coming up? I'll make sure. Oh, it might come up with, sometimes the JPEGs don't come up. One second. So transition words. So we talk a lot about this in vocabulary. Oftentimes we work on this. And also when you look at a goal sequencing of a story, sequencing a task appropriately, oftentimes we have to review this vocabulary. First, to begin with, to start with initially, middle, next, then, later, second, and then end, finally, last, at last. So we definitely kind of work on these transition words in a variety of ways. One second. okay? So vocabulary. So here's some just what I like. This is a nice kind of overview on vocabulary. So I want to say, I don't like writing vocabulary goals, but I have. And if you do have a vocabulary goal that you come across as an SLPA, make sure that you know what you're doing with that goal. I feel like sometimes we write, and I say we SLPs write some generic vocab goals. I feel my difficulty with vocabulary is measuring it appropriately in the manner that which I want to. So my vocabulary goals, the way I write them, are kind of what I would say goofy, and that I'm trying to set a criteria. Sometimes I'll define the words that I want them to know in the goal. Sometimes I might say something like, given a list of 20, work-related words. I've written that for adult rehab. So we're working on their vocabulary related to their work-specific vocab, and why that's important. And that might be important as part of their return to work possibilities. So oftentimes I might say, how I'm measuring that goal, or I might give my SLPA, here's the list of words. When I'm talking about given a list of 20, 30, 40 words, this is what I'm working on, or this is what I want them to be sure they know and understand. So oftentimes though, what we do know is that for reading comprehension, they need to understand the words that they're reading. So if you have poor vocabulary recognition, poor vocabulary knowledge, oftentimes then your reading comprehension is negatively impacted. Language development, super critical. You need the vocabulary in order to build your language. Communicating ideas. So definitely saying what you want, saying what you mean, saying what you want to say, and conveying that message appropriately. Writing, super critical. If you're not able to come up with the words that's needed, that can definitely impact your ability to express yourself well, and especially in our writing. So oftentimes, like I said, occupational success, we do know good vocabulary has better outcomes from career, job, that kind of thing. So, and that makes sense to me when you think about it. Poor vocabulary, they might not be very efficient at their job in a variety of ways. So there's an adult literacy session plan. Now, oftentimes, that's where we start. When we're starting adult rehab, start with something that they like, something they read, something they know. So you can start to kind of build on their comprehension, their vocabulary, their language formulation, whether that be question-based, statement-based, response-based. So definitely some parts with literacy, that's a good place to start, especially with our adult rehab clients. But oftentimes, this is where we start with little people. So when I say little people, my co-worker, she says little people, little humans all the time. So what I want to say about how do we support anybody developing language or regaining language, it's literacy. Listening to books, reading books, looking at books, interacting with books, all of those things help develop language. So there's a vocabulary card game. So this is what I want to say. A lot of people, I think, struggle with this assignment. This is what we do as a therapist. And it's hard because you guys don't have a client in front of you. For instance, today, I just did this. I have a friend, or I call a friend, person I work with, who, meaning a child with an IEP with services, we're really working on struggles with vocab, struggles acquiring new vocab, learning the new vocab, and constantly just even some basic things. So parents brought up about like 10 words, it seems this child still has not learned, and they've worked on it at home. So we're reinforcing at school. And I made a vocab card game with some of the key vocabulary words, or, things when we say inappropriate, what does that mean? When we say Responsible, what does that mean? It seems like these are words we say all the time, but it really seems like he doesn't know them. So listening to parents' feedback, listening to the teacher's feedback, I'll make games all the time. I'll pull up, okay, what are the 20 words I want to work with right now? Okay, let's do that. And let's come up with some activities. Because typically speaking, I really like the vocab card game, obviously, for our young population. But with adults, I think we might make some vocab cards, but they're kind of done differently. We don't necessarily do them as a game. But oftentimes, even in the adult rehab, we are working on vocabulary, giving them opportunity to interact with those words and demonstrate they know what they mean, recall what they mean. And then there's a quiz, or excuse me, not a quiz, read and review summary. So definitely look at, like, this kind of gives you more scenario based of why are we doing this? So oftentimes what I encourage all of you to do, whenever you see a goal, and this is where, and I think sometimes language goals get, when I say goofy, they just get very specific, or there's a lot of criteria in there. But definitely with vocabulary, you really need to get some input from your supervisor on what vocabulary are you targeting and how are you targeting? Do you want them just to recognize it? Do you want them to be able to utilize it? Oftentimes I write vocabulary goals for expressive language. You know, Johnny will use grade specific or work related vocabulary in appropriate manner in a 5-minute language sample. So really what I'm looking for, especially if the particular issue when we're looking at our adult rehab, if they have trouble with word findings or they substitute different words than the word that they mean, oftentimes I monitor that with the expressive language piece. But still, it's still a receptive language also, because if you don't know the word and you don't know, I mean, if you know the word but you don't know what it means, that's more receptive language than expressive. So I feel like vocab goals are hard. They could be receptive and expressive, and oftentimes they're both. So you just might need direction and help on how to target it in a session. And also when we're looking at some of these other components of narrative language, okay, how are we measuring that? So oftentimes I'll do retelling a story. They give me they give me 4 specific details, or they're able to retell in proper sequence. So oftentimes that's why anybody who works with me, they'll see I have a lot of, gosh, this year we've been missing them, my co-therapist and I were talking about. So I have a bunch of like puppets I purchased that go with books, especially like young books that are really popular. Like Lakeshore Learning has a bunch of these, like what I call manipulatives that go with some of the stories. I have a bunch, probably have all of them they've made. I make up manipulatives and things to go with books, because that's like my multi-sensory experience. That's how I can get them to engage and retell. Okay, I have a visual, what is it? And then I want them to verbalize with it. So if any of you are familiar with the napping house, so I have a couple different manipulatives with that. So I have the puppets that go with it. And that's fun because I make them put it in the right order. And, you know, I have a big Velcro board thing that they do that, and they have Velcro on them. I also have a picture of, you know, which the order that they get in the house and what happens when one person keeps adding to the bed. And then there's just so many language things I can do with that, just that one book, that one piece of literature. And then I have done it with maybe an older group where we make up our own story with some of the same components of the story. So that's kind of fun too, to take a book that often people are familiar with and then make your own version of it. That's fun. Like I've seen different versions of The Hungry Caterpillar. I have like one with zombies, and there's another one, I want to say with the vampire or Dracula or something. So there's some funny ways that I've seen that done, and I like to compare and contrast 2 books. So I've done that too, to where we really work on that language piece. How are things alike? How are things different? So narrative language to me is pretty comprehensive. You can usually target a skill that your client needs to work on with that, as well as vocabulary in a variety of ways. So I know this one therapist, she does adult rehab. They like to try to read some things in fact check. So, hey, did this really happen? Is this a real number? Where would we find this number? And the person she says working with is a researcher. So definitely some, skills, but she says instead of using, very technical things, they use like Us Weekly, In Touch, all those fun things. Let's see if this is true. Can we find accurate information? Let's read this story in this week's and from last week's. Okay, what is it saying? And we were giggling about that because, I do the same thing just on a preschool level. And it's just kind of fun. So to me, I feel like so much can be targeted with those things. So any other questions?
I have a question about the vocabulary card game. Well, I have a couple questions.
Okay.
The first, it says that we can submit a text box, media recording, or upload, but in the assignment, it also says your beginning PowerPoint slide will introduce the skill you're teaching.
Yeah.
So which one of those things are you?
So what some people do, definitely I like the PowerPoints or Google Slides, because then you can just print them out. But some people, if you, I really, you can do video if you want. What I need to see is, how do you want to build it? Some people do their own, make their own in person, take pictures. Usually it's easy to do it on Google Slide. You could upload Word picture. However you want to do it is how you can do it. So that's all really. It's like I said, I used to make it be in a PowerPoint, but some people did it differently. You don't have to do it in a PowerPoint or Google Slide presentation. It's just usually easy that way. And then when you're making materials, you can print those out.
And then, my second question was like, if we can find cards online for you. It sounds like you want us to make them.
Is the card game for the adult population?
Say that one more time. I'm sorry. Sorry, families.
I asked if it was for adult population.
You can, yeah. So sometimes when you're working, because you have to make sometimes vocab specific to your client. So I've done this with the adults too, where we make some flashcards, we review them, or we're trying to determine, can they return to work? Do they have enough knowledge and things to do their job? So oftentimes we do it as part of the practice, as part of the therapy session, to help them remember, recall. And for me, sometimes I don't know what it is. And oftentimes I do that vocab kind of activity. And I would say I call it a game, but it's more of, do they know what it is? Can they look at something, recognize it, and then, regurgitate it out if they need to, especially when their job, depending on their job. Again, someone who's a nurse, that looks a whole lot different. Oops, why does that keep doing that? Sorry, I hit the wrong button on that. That someone, if they can't use the vocabulary, that might be something when we're making recommendations with the rehab counselor, can they return to work? But if they can't use the vocab, sometimes then it's not applicable for them to return to work. So I just do different vocabulary activities with a variety of ways. And truly, like I said, these are components that we do just at different levels in different ways, from young to adults. I don't know, has anybody had like a person with a stroke and they're trying to recall the words, or even recognizing family members? So I might even do it, hey, here's a picture, what's their name, to help that automaticity of recall. So oftentimes we really like that with the people who have word finding difficulties. So any other questions? So sorry, 1,000,001 interruptions.
I I have a question on, like, I know probably you have the next class, but I have a quick question on one of the assignments from last week. It's the one with the song. They have to change the words.
Yeah.
Okay, so I already done it, but I was just maybe overthinking it.
Okay.
Do we need to like change exactly every word, or because what I did? No, like we can just play with it which like how we like.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Like I said, a lot of times it's more for the intent. You don't have to change every single word, nor do any of us who do use it. That's like, unless you have that much talent. I don't think I do. But yeah, sometimes you use like the same words, but you just might change one word.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Because
definitely.
what I did, for example, was just like I use like the refrain, or I use like one sentence, and then like, for example, I found a different sentence that rhymes with the previous one. So for example, like just for following directions, for example, that's what I did. So that's why I was asking. If we were free, like to play with it as much as we want it, that's good. Because
yes.
That's what I did.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's just more, these are just simple ways to incorporate some multisensory activities in ways to help kind of make you kind of think, okay, how can I help this person remember it? Or what's something especially repetitive? So oftentimes what I like about, like you said, like refrain, something that's repetitive that helps that recall and helps them remember is super helpful. So.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, guys, thank you for joining me.